Welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast, where we celebrate the incredible journeys of fathers who are making a difference. Hosted by Urban Light Ministry President and author, Pastor Eli Williams. Each week, we'll hear from an inspiring guest who will share their unique fatherhood story. We'll discuss the challenges, triumphs, and lessons learned along the way, offering valuable insights and encouragement for all dads. Join us as we explore the power of fatherhood and build a brighter future for our families.
Hello and welcome to the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams. Delightful to have you along with us here for this episode. And our guest today is my good friend, a young man I've known for a long time. And he's got a tremendous work going on that I want you to know about. But Chris, first of all, let me say thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
We're delighted. So let's begin, as we usually do on the Fathering Strong podcast, with some insights from your life. Tell us about your fatherhood journey, and let's begin with your relationship with your father. Talk about that.
Relationship? What is that? No. I grew up. I was adopted when I was about 6 months old. So I never had any knowledge or knowing of my biological family. I was adopted, being a biracial kid. I lived in a white home where my adopted parents were originally from Kentucky, but I grew up in a predominantly mixed, area here in Dayton, Ohio, and so it was my father, my adoptive father. He was a very silent man. My mother ran the household, so it was kind of one of them things where go ask your mother, And so he really did not have much of a voice, though he did show me some things throughout the course of my life, but I never could say that I had a true relationship with that growing up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But you did at some point, not too long ago, come to know who your biological father is.
Yes.
Talk about that.
So my wife, for our anniversary of about 3 or 4 years ago, decided that because I was having some health issues, decided that she was going to hire a private investigator to try to, see who my biological family was. And lo and behold, within days, they came back with names, addresses, Facebook pages, just the whole 9 yards. And I reached out, who was at the time there where you are at in Springfield. Reached out, who was on paperwork was my brother, and as soon as I mentioned my birth name to him, he said he knew exactly who I was. I was never a secret to anybody on my mother's side of the family. Within days, I had met my mother, not knowing what to expect, asked my mother who my father was, and come to find out that my father, my biological father, was one of the largest bishops ever known in the city of Dayton at one point. So that's a whole another story within itself. But I did come to find out that during this time period of not knowing, I've met him on several occasions. I sat in his pulpit. I've sung. I've shook his hand. I've given him a hug, the whole 9 yards. And the whole time he was my biological father, and I never knew it.
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah.
Now, your childhood growing up, your teenage years were kind of rough,
mm-hmm.
Right? You struggled some.
You're being too gracious.
Well, I mean, share as much of that as you would like.
I mean, I have no problems with that. In fact, I have a book coming out in September. It's an autobiography of my life entitled The Son of a Curse, A Letter to Daddy. And I'm writing a letter to my father, introducing myself to him as his son. But I, I mean, growing up, I was very confused, trying to search for an identity, being a biracial kid living in a white home. And it wasn't just, it was like a two-edged sword because not only were they white, but they were from the hollers down in Kentucky. So they were kind of, hillbilly white. So,
Yeah.
so that was kind of rough. And then, growing up, just trying to find an identity, trying to find, who I was. It was rough. So I fought a lot. I was very violent, very, developed a lot of horrible things. And because of my outbursts and behavior, my adopted parents was like, we cannot deal with him. And about the age of 9, I went into my first group home. Well, and during my time that I was in that group home, at 9 years old, I was sexually assaulted by one of the staff members. And I rung out to the other staff, tried to tell them what happened. Nobody wanted to listen. Nobody wanted to, hear me. Everybody tried to cover it up. Nobody, I mean, just anything. And like 2 days later, I just remember I ran. I left the place. I'm not going to mention names or locations of where this place was, because I think the incident, there were some great things that they did for people and they still exist today. So I don't want to, spoil that reputation. But um, I vowed in that moment when I wasn't heard in that day, like nobody will ever get close enough to hurt me again, and I turned into a very violent, broken person. I didn't care who you was, where you was. Nobody would ever hurt me again. Um, so I grew up that way, in and out of group homes, in and out of detention homes, in and out of different places. Because everywhere I went, I was fighting or, assaulting staff members and doing a lot of stuff in my youth. Um, Hence, ending up in Springfield, where I met you when I was like 15 years old, and you began to, I guess, pour into me and kind of introduce me to Jesus for the first time, and it was just something different, I think, for me in that encounter, uh, because there was a almost a godly gentleness that was there, and I really appreciated that, and I think in the beginning I didn't really even connect with you as much as I did with your wife, and me and, your wife, Judy. I guess I was longing in that moment for that mother figure that with no judgment, just to let me be me, but at 17 years old, um, I, I ended up catching several felonies. And I was sentenced at 17 years old to 20 to 50 years. And I ended up going to the penitentiary at 17, um, and just continued my, okay, I'm in a joint now, so I don't care if I live or die. I'm thinking I'm about to do 50 years, in prison at that time. And so I fought and fought and fought. I probably spent, for the first year and a half, I spent more time in the hold than I did out in general population with everybody else. And um, so, just needless to say, during the time that I was there, you know, uh, probably my relationship with you, my relationship with Judy, just the extension of having you guys in my life consistently during that time, really, pouring into me from a God place. And I met a gentleman while I was in there by the name of Walter Roy. and he was really engaged in the music program that they had there. And he kind of pulled me in and, kind of dusted me off a little bit, as they say. And so we became very good friends and started going to church and different things like that. And finally didn't come home till I was almost 31. But by the time that I did come home, I had a very strong relationship, with Christ. And um, I learned what it was like to be in relationship with him, because I was empty. I had no love for nobody. I didn't, like I say, when the word tells us, that he died for the brokenhearted, I was that person, so uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
as close as I could kind of get.
Yeah. That's a powerful story, Chris, and it never ceases to bring me joy whenever you share it, because I can look at your life now and see how far God has brought you.
Man.
And so I want us to spend some time with you sharing
Mhm.
how you were called into the ministry, and what eventually resulted from your yieldedness to the Lord's will in your life in terms of ministry. So we will get into that after we take this very short time out. I'm Eli Williams. My guest today is Chris Campbell. This is the Fathering Strong podcast. Stay with us.
Looking to be the best dad you can be? The Fathering Strong podcast is your guide. Hosted by Pastor Eli Williams, each episode features inspiring conversations with dads who are making a difference. Learn valuable strategies for building strong families, tackle tough fatherhood issues, and get motivated to be your best self. Never miss an episode. Subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Your subscription helps us provide free services and resources to families in need. Don't wait. Subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast today and join our community of dads committed to building strong families. Together, let's make a difference.
Welcome back, friends. This is the Fathering Strong podcast. My guest today is Chris Campbell. Chris, thanks for sharing your story. Now, you are now a father yourself.
Mhm.
So,
Yes, sir.
what were the circumstances around your first child? And then we'll talk a little bit about that experience.
So my first child happened rather quickly. Um, Naturally, being locked up for so long, and even though I had a relationship with Christ at the time, I was never prepared for what the world was going to be when I came home, because I've been in prison from the time I was 17, and now I'm getting out and I'm 31. So um, I immediately started dating someone or talking to somebody, and I mean, fresh out the joint, it was just like, okay, yeah, here we go. And uh, literally within a month, she was pregnant. Um, so it was interesting. It was interesting, because she and not to I'm not here to diminish characters. Let's just say we did not work. You know, so very quickly I ended up moving back to Dayton uh, within the first within the first 6 months of being in Columbus, where I had paroled to when I came home. So I had so she was pregnant with my firstborn son, um, which was which is little Chris. Everybody knows him as. So um, yeah, that was rather interesting. So he was born. I went up to Columbus. I was there, when briefly, maybe a few hours after he was actually born. Um, Me and her never saw eye to eye on anything, because I wanted a different type of life, and she was still wanting a different type of life. And um, so we were very distant for, for, for quite a while. Um, and she used my son a lot of the times almost as a pawn, in whatever she could try to get out of her relationship with me. So yeah,
Did she have other children?
yeah, she had two other sons, and her two other sons. I to this day I have good relationships with. So that was kind of odd to me, but um, a lot of broken relationships,
Yeah.
a lot of and a lot of it was a result of her drug use, her alcoholism, different things like that was going on, and I just did not want to be around it.
Was she using drugs while pregnant with little Chris?
Yes. Um, so it was a situation. So a little later on, Chris was. This went on, just that broken relationship. I'm only there for maybe, you know, when Chris was baby. We would go up, bring him down to Columbus. Bring him back down to Dayton, visit with him like over a weekend, and take him back. It was kind of little things like that for a while, and then finally there was a pretty major incident that happened up there concerning my son, and it was something. Someone attempted um, to sexually assault my son, and he called me um, on the phone, just crying, screaming, begging me to come and get him. And I immediately hit the highway and I went to Columbus. And they said, I don't understand. They said I blacked out. I don't remember because I probably did. But I got out the car and they said there was police officers and different things that was around, and my son was on the porch, and uh, the other person was like over in the yard on the side of the neighbor's house over there with officers, and they were trying to figure out what it was that was going on. And they said that I walked right through the yard, guns in hand, and I was walking directly over to the guy, and a police officer screamed out, he has a gun, or whatever, and I was. That was a whole nother situation. I was tackled, thrown to the ground, the whole 9 yards. Here it is. I'm a felon, not supposed to have a firearm at the time, and all of that. But I give God all the glory and honor because they took they took my son and took him into the house, and the police lieutenant, um, he they took me over to the cruiser. Took me out of the cruiser, and he was standing there. He was talking with me. It was one of my father's firearms. My adopted father. It was one of his firearms that I had took, and he covered me. They deemed it mitigated circumstances concerning something around my son, but God just covered me. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but needless to say, I left there that morning with my son, and I brought him back to Dayton. We filed a temporary uh, protection order and a temporary TCO, a temporary custody order. They granted me temporary custody. A few months later, I have full custody of him, and I raised him the rest of his life.
Yes, and you've done a fine job with him, I might add. He is now a military veteran,
Yes.
and
Graduated high school, went to the military.
Yep.
He is now with his girlfriend, expecting their first child, and he has a job and being a good provider, has his own place and everything. So I'm happy for him.
And he loves Jesus.
And he loves the Lord. Yes, he does.
Yeah,
Yes, he
yeah.
does.
So great story. Thank you for going into that and being willing to share it with our audience, Chris. All right. So, and then came another child.
Yes. Me and my daughter's mother, we were together for about 5 years. We dated for about 5 years, and um, my daughter was she got pregnant within like our first year of dating, and then we were together like about 4 years after that. And just some things and circumstances. God was really leading me in one direction. That's when He truly just started tugging on my heart that it's time for me to live kind of for Him and in a truly much different way. Than just kind of being this carnal Christian, that believes in God, but just out here living the way that He wants to live.
Right.
And so me and her, we separated. Um, was very involved with my daughter's life from every step of the way throughout her whole life. And so my daughter currently is 15. She's a freshman in high school. She runs track. She's in orchestra, and she loves the Lord as well. And but she some financial things came up with her mom and some different things like that. But she's I've had I've had custody of her since she was 6. Yeah.
I'll ask you two questions related to her.
Uh-huh.
One, what has been your greatest challenge in raising a daughter as a single father? And then I'm going to ask you what has been your greatest joy. But let's start with the challenge. What is your greatest challenge?
I don't think when we talk about challenges, I I don't think it's gender specific, whether it was my son or my daughter. I think
Okay. Yeah.
just the
Yeah.
greatest challenge in general for me was understanding this generation. Because I lived by a much different code when I was coming up, and how I interacted as a young kid was much different, than how these kids interact and what goes on now, and I think that's probably my biggest thing. Um, because my daughter and I have a very good relationship. I mean, um, now that she's getting a little older, she's a little less communicative with me, and a little bit more standoffish, a little bit, I guess. But I would say that would be my biggest fear, just understanding, or my biggest challenge is understanding the processes of what she is going through in each level and trying to pour into her without taking advantage of the vulnerability that she gives me.
Let me see if I understand what you're saying. You're saying it doesn't have much to do with the fact that you're male and she's female. It's more about the way she sees the world and the way she,
Absolutely.
the differences in the culture that she's growing up in and the one that you grew up in.
Absolutely.
So communication becomes more of a challenge.
Correct.
And I don't
The
know if the
older
word
she gets. Yeah.
the older she gets.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think why I feel that way is it's because in my generation of growing up, um, you know, how we dealt as men with young women when we were growing up, it's a much different world now. Like, these kids out here at, you know, 6, 7, 8 years old understand a lot of the stuff that and they're trying to act on the things that we understood, but we didn't necessarily act on. If that makes sense.
And what do you contribute a lot of that to? Does it have to do with the more access they have to information, like through the internet and social media and those types of things?
I think it's a combination of a lot of factors. I think when you look at this generation, there is an absence of parents in this generation. So oftentimes, whether it be an absentee mother or an absentee father, they don't necessarily have that village anymore that, used to exist, before. So now when we talk about the social media and the generation and all of this, that is what begins to raise our children. So they know more TikTok videos than they can do their ABCs, So, yeah, I think that has a lot to do with it. But I think the key thing is just absentee parenting.
Yeah. Well, of course, that's one of our passions, to try to bring light to that and offer some resources to work with these parents who perhaps are single parenting as a result of the absenteeism, but also to try to reach out to those parents, mothers or fathers, who are not as engaged in the raising of their children as they should be.
Absolutely.
I want to now shift to the work that you're doing. You were called to the ministry. When did that happen, and how did you know that it was a calling from God?
Well, I've known since probably I was about 15 years old when I met you. When you began to pour into me, that there was just something about those interactions. At the time, I did not understand that was, the Lord and the Spirit of God setting up roots, in me that would come along and get watered at a different time. But those seeds were planted, and it was roughly around 2000 and it was about 2009 when I truly began to start getting serious. Now, keep in mind, I had sung and I had played and I had done a lot of different things, in different churches and different things along the way, because I always still went to church, even though I was still, living the way that I wanted to live. I was still going to church.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that was a lot of my major problem, is that I got comfortable with having church, but I had no relationship
Mm-hmm.
with God. I had
Mm-hmm.
relationship with going to church.
Right.
So then when God really began to start tugging at my heart, I began to start attending a ministry, Harvest Light Family Ministries, with Pastor Parks. And I met, rest his soul, I met a brother by the name of, his name was Nick Collier. And we were co-workers, and he said, "Hey, you need to come, visit my church one day." And I went and I visited, and I just saw, a lot of things that I liked, and the Spirit of God began to just kind of tug on me a little bit, like, "Hey, I need you to rest in this place for a while." So shortly after, I became the minister of music, and then after I became a licensed minister, and then I was licensed as an elder of the church. And that was from about 2010 to about 2017.
So then at some point, you realized that you were being called out to start your own fellowship.
Correct.
Tell us about that process.
Well, I noticed that even though, an amazing work was being done in the ministry, where I was at, I just felt like God was calling me to something more. And he began to start laying on my heart, don't forget about who you were. And that's kind of how he spoke to me. And I used to, for a long time, I was like, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean don't forget who you are? I thought we're supposed to forget those things which are behind us, but God began to show me, I'm talking about the feelings. He was showing me, like, when you felt unloved, when you felt unwanted, when you felt nobody cared, when you felt these things, and that there was a generation of people who are out here that felt just like you do right now. And they are being overlooked. They're being forgotten about, because a lot of places are kind of more interested in just having church, and they forget about the people that are hurting. So God began to pour into me about that it's time to begin a fellowship of believers. And during the course of that, I warred with it for probably about 2 years. Like, okay, Lord, is it, give me confirmation, give me confirmation, give me confirmation. And then finally he just said, you know what, it's time. And I turned in my resignation to where it was that I stepped out on faith, and the Holy Spirit gave me Love Alliance Christian Fellowship. And it is just an alliance of love. Our scripture is John, 13:34, a new commandment that I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. And so we founded this ministry just on the principle of loving people with the love of God, regardless where you're at. We don't care if you're black, white, short, tall, if you're a drug addict, if you are, an alcoholic, if you're struggling with homosexuality, or if you're struggling with whatever it looks like. There's a place where people will be able to love on you unconditionally, so that God can do the work that he needs to do. Because it's not up to me or anyone else to do the work. That's up to God. But we just want to provide an environment of just love, unconditional love for people that feel that way.
Yeah, it's a beautiful vision and mission. Now, all of this happened, I believe it was during COVID. Is that right?
We began, prior to COVID, I stepped away prior to COVID.
Uh-huh.
And when I stepped away prior to COVID, about 8 months later, COVID hit. And I was warned. I'm like, okay, God, how are we supposed to do this thing now? I know you told me what you told me. I don't know how to do this now. So we created, we did all the legalistic stuff that we needed to do with the Secretary of State. And we did all of the stuff that we had to do. But then the pandemic hit. And then when the pandemic hit, I can't.
Hold up. Before you get to that.
Yes, sir.
I want to make people wait through this next break.
Right.
And when we come back, then you can tell us about the innovation that you used to begin your church right there in the midst of a global pandemic.
Amen.
His name is Chris Campbell, and he is my guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. I'm Eli Williams, and we'll be back after this timeout, and we'll continue our conversation and then wrap things up. Stay with us.
Children benefit significantly from the presence of committed, loving, nurturing fathers. Strong fathers contribute to stable families and safe, healthy communities. Fathering Strong connects, engages, and empowers fathers. Join the fatherhood movement at fatheringstrong.com to discover a wealth of resources, from inspiring videos to informative articles and instructive courses. By subscribing to our resources, you're not just helping yourself, you're helping Fathering Strong provide these valuable tools to families in need. Visit fatheringstrong.com, download the app, and subscribe to our YouTube channel today. Together, let's build stronger families and communities.
Welcome back to the Fathering Strong podcast. My guest is Chris Campbell, and we were just hearing from Chris about the challenge and the innovative way that God gave him to begin a church during a season of COVID and what has been the fruit from that. So, Chris, I'll have you pick up right where you left off. You had this vision.
Mhm.
You got your legal things together. You established the board, the congregation, infrastructure, and all of that.
Mhm.
But you can't meet. So what did you do?
Well, I came across, and it was an app that was becoming kind of popular at the time. It had just came out, and it was called Clubhouse. And it was a place where, they have different, topics of conversation, just kind of like a social media platform where people could still interact during a global pandemic, and you can still laugh and talk and interact with people. And God just began to start speaking to me like, wow, like this is it right here. Uh, so we began just kind of like at first just opened up a prayer room, and we just kind of created a prayer room where we would come together, and then the prayer room turned into a Bible study, and Bible study turned into Sunday service, and before you knew it, I mean, we had 25, 30 people that was joining us, for Sunday services uh, on this social media platform.
And it's audio only,
It's
right?
audio only. It's not. It's not no video. It's not no Zoom. It's not anything. It's just a audio only. And we found out that there were people, and when I tell you, we have had people all the way from Barbados to Nigeria to California, Denver, Colorado, Detroit, Atlanta, New York. I mean, everywhere. Who has? We actually have somebody who attends our services periodically that's from the UK. So we were just like, oh my God, like Lord. Uh, so we truly just kept putting our foot to the plow, being consistent with holding the events on social media platforms. Uh, and then God said, well, you know what? Maybe we should switch some of this to video platforms. One step at a time. He began to kind of like show me step engagement. So we started having our Bible study on Zoom instead of having it on there. That way people could see each other's faces a little bit and interact with one another, put faces to the names, because for almost a year, we had just been on this audio only platform.
Mm-hmm.
So, and just amazing relationships were being built. Uh, so here we are. The pandemic is slowly, dying down now. And the Lord just placed it on my heart to, why don't we hold, now that we are slowly able to start coming together again, why don't we hold what we call our revival in the park? I mean, at the time, we don't have our own building. We don't have nothing. We're a social media platform, based. And so we put together our first annual Love Alliance Christian Fellowship's Revival in the Park, which we held in Inglewood, Ohio, here where I live. And we opened it up for anybody that was a part of our social media family to come. And we were just, our first year, we had, I think the number was 26, 24, 26 people from around the country that flew in, got their hotel rooms, were a part of this weekend that we had put together. And they had become official Love Alliance members. They're saying, we don't want to go nowhere else. Love Alliance is our church home. And I was just so blown away by what God was doing. And so we didn't rush it. We didn't push it. The next year, we continued right where we was at, and God just began to bless us to where people were tithing to the ministry, they were giving to the ministry, and you know firsthand how hard that is sometimes for people to be willing to give to the church anymore. And they were giving and sowing, and this was a social media platform. Like, you haven't even met half of these people face to face, and we began to start blessing the community, began to be very transparent with everything that we did, because we knew that if we're having these finances come in from people all over, we have to be accountable for that. So we put it out there for everybody to see. This is what we got. This is what we're doing. This is where we're going. This is how we're blessing. And God just, the more we did that, God just blessed. And he began to connect us, make some wonderful ministry partners, and connect us with different people throughout the community. And a year, golly, it's been over a year now. We had an opportunity to have a building. So I had a meeting with a gentleman by the name of Josh Haynes, and he is the director of the YMCA of Inglewood, Ohio. And after meeting with him, it was just a blessing, because he opened up the doors of the YMCA to us, for us to have a church home, a physical location to hold services out of. And so we've done that now for the last 2 years. And we have been growing in number in person. We have been still growing with our social media family. And this year is our first year where our calendar is just sewn over. We have stuff going on all over the country this year. That is Love Alliance events and things. So I'm just in awe of what God is doing.
It's pretty amazing.
Yes.
So it is the Love Alliance Christian Fellowship.
Mm-hmm.
You're meeting at the Inglewood YMCA. You've got prayer going on every morning.
Yes.
At 7:00. You've got a women's group on Clubhouse. You've got a man cave on Clubhouse. You have got a Bible study on Thursdays.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've got your discipleship class on Saturdays. And, of course, your Sunday service,
mm-hmm.
which is at 10 a.m.
Yes.
All of that there at the YMCA in Inglewood.
Correct.
That's quite amazing.
Amen.
And so you've got this small group that comes to meet in person, but you're also simulcasting it on your social media platforms,
exactly,
so that people can join in from wherever they are in the world.
Correct.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, we use a platform called StreamYard, and StreamYard sends it out to all of our social media platforms. So you can follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Clubhouse, and it streams to all of the platforms simultaneously live as it's going on. So it's not pre-recorded anything. We're right there live in your face.
And you and your church are a part of the Fathering Strong movement, for which we are
absolutely
very, very grateful.
Absolutely.
Very grateful.
Yeah,
Chris, we could probably go on. We could probably go on for a long time, and so no doubt I'll have you back on to come in and continue our conversation.
I would love it.
But this is going to wrap up this edition of the Fathering Strong podcast. How might someone get a hold of you if they have questions, or perhaps are even interested in learning more about the Love Alive Christian Fellowship?
They can go to our website, which is lovealliancecf.org, lovealliancecf.org, or you can email us directly at lovealliancecf@gmail.com. If you go to our website, it has our full calendar of events, everything that we're doing, the where, what, how, when, and why, and our services on Sunday is at 10 a.m. at 1200 National Road at the Kleps YMCA, and you can just show up and join us. You don't even need to make a reservation.
Thanks you so much, my friend. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Chris Campbell has been my guest today on the Fathering Strong podcast. Listen, if you would like to subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast, we want to encourage you to do that. Just go to Zoom, the Fathering Strong. I said Zoom, I meant YouTube. Go to the Fathering Strong YouTube page, and there you'll see the archived podcast episodes and where you can subscribe so that you can receive notification about the podcast episodes as they are released. And that helps us to be able to continue to provide our services free of charge. So we hope that you'll become a Fathering Strong podcast subscriber. And don't forget about our weekly blog as well. You can subscribe to that as well. So thank you so much. God bless you. We'll talk to you next time on the Fathering Strong podcast.
Thanks for joining us on another episode of the Fathering Strong podcast. We hope you found the conversation inspiring and helpful. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, subscribe to the Fathering Strong podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Just search for Fathering Strong in your favorite app. The Fathering Strong podcast is brought to you by Urban Light Ministries, a nonprofit organization with a 3-decade legacy dedicated to turning the hearts of fathers to their children. Thanks to your support, we're able to keep this podcast and many other resources free for dads everywhere. To learn more about Urban Light Ministries or to donate and help us continue this important work, visit urbanlight.org. The Fathering Strong podcast is a production of Urban Light Ministries. Eli Williams is your host, and Bruce Stapleton of the Momentum Group is the producer and engineer. Our theme music is provided by saxophonist Harold Rayford.